Did ancient writers discuss the existence of Jesus? Strikingly, there was never any debate in the ancient world about whether Jesus of Nazareth was a historical figure. In the earliest literature of the Jewish Rabbis, Jesus was denounced as the illegitimate child of Mary and a sorcerer. Among pagans, the satirist Lucian and philosopher Celsus dismissed Jesus as a scoundrel, but we know of no one in the ancient world who questioned whether Jesus lived. Historians are well aware that they have more trustworthy evidence for and information about Jesus than we have for any person more than 1,000 years ago. This includes Livy, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Thucydides, Suetonius, Herodotus, Horace, Sophocles, Lucretius, Catullus, Euripides, Demosthenes, and Aristophanes. Of the ancient writers, outside of the Bible, who documented the existence of Jesus Christ, here are 22. Abgar, king of Osroene, the Babylonian Sanhedrin 43a, Celsus, a pagan philosopher, Clement, Egeria, Eusebius, the Gnostics, Ignatius, Irenaeus, Josephus Flavius, a Jewish historian, Julian, a Roman emperor, Lucian the Cynic of Samosata, a Greek satirist, Mara bar Serapion, Mohammed, 93 verses in the Quran, Movses Koronatzi, Origen, Phlegon, Pliny the Younger, a Roman magistrate, Suetonius, a Roman historian, Tacitus, a Roman historian, the Jewish Talmud, and Thales. Here's a bit more detail on some of those who mentioned Jesus. Abgar, king of Osroene with his capital at Edessa, the first Christian king in history thanks to Thaddeus, wrote in 32 AD to Jesus and got a reply. The letter, written in Syriac, reside in the archives of Edessa. Celsus, a Greek philosopher, was perhaps the most hostile. He claimed Mary had sex with a Roman soldier and that was where Jesus came from, and the Jews killed him for it. Celsus never bothered to claim Jesus didn't exist. Egeria, traveling through Edessa, mentioned the letters between Jesus and King Abgar being read in the city. The Jewish historian Josephus, 75 AD, mentions Jesus in his Antiquities 1863-64 twice. He remarked on the stoning of James, the brother of Jesus. So, Ananus assembled a council of judges and brought before it the brother of Jesus, the so-called Christ, whose name was James, together with some others, and having accused them as lawbreakers, he delivered them over to be stoned. Antiquities 29:1. Conclusion: Jesus did exist. He was called Christ. He had a brother called James. Josephus mentions Jesus again in the Testimonium Flavium. The Roman Emperor Julian the Apostate, born 330 CE, died 363 CE, rejected and fiercely sought to reverse the influence of Christianity, never disputing Jesus' existence but ridiculing his words and actions in his Contra Galileos, which is not disputed as authentic. Julian had access to and power over all the record-keeping and literature of the Roman Empire. He simply ridicules Jesus as a charlatan but doesn't question his existence. Even Jesus, who was proclaimed among you, was one of Caesar's subjects, and if you do not believe me I will prove it a little later, or rather, let me simply assert it now. However, you admit that with his father and mother, he registered his name in the governorship of Cyrenius. Yet Jesus, who won over the least worthy of you, has been known by name for but little more than 300 years, and during his lifetime he accomplished nothing worth hearing of, unless anyone thinks that to heal crooked and blind men, and to exorcise those who were possessed by evil demons in the villages of Bethsaida and Bethany can be classed as a mighty achievement. As for purity of life, you do not know whether he so much as mentioned it, but you emulate the rages and the bitterness of the Jews towards idols, overturning temples and altars in the same fashion as yourselves. But these are rather your own doings, for nowhere did either Jesus or Paul hand down to you such commands. The reason for this is that they never even hoped that you would one day attain to such power as you have, for they were content if they could delude maidservants and slaves and through them the women and men like Cornelius and Sergius. But if you can show me that one of these men is mentioned by the well-known writers of that time, these events happened in the reign of Tiberius or Claudius, then you may consider that I speak falsely about all matters. Julian thus argues that Jesus was obscure but not imaginary. This is therefore a hostile informed ancient authority supporting the argument that mere lack of too much immediate contemporary evidence is not likely to be proof of non-existence, but is just proof or evidence of relative obscurity in their original time. Lucian the Cynic of Samosata, a Greek satirist, wrote, "The Christians, you know, worship a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites and was crucified on that account. It was impressed on them by their original lawgiver that they are all brothers from the moment they are converted and deny the gods of Greece and worship the crucified sage and live after his laws. The death of Peregrinus, 11-13. Conclusion. Jesus did exist. Jesus was the founder of Christianity. Jesus was worshipped by his followers. Jesus suffered death by crucifixion. Pliny the Younger, a Roman magistrate and governor of Bithynia, references Christ directly in his correspondence with Emperor Trajan, 3 times specifically as the originator of Christianity. Trajan was trying to figure out what to do with these rather clean living Christians who lead blameless lives but refuse to worship the approved gods. Pliny's letter to the emperor and vice versa about how to deal with Christians in the provinces. Suetonius, a Roman historian, 121 AD, mentions how the Jews started a riot at the instigation of Chrestus during the reign of Claudius. He mentions Christianity and specifically mentions Christ as the founder of this troublesome religion. The Jews were causing disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, universally held to be a misunderstanding of conflict between Jews and Christians over the person of Christ. A little later, 64 AD, writing of the Neronian persecutions, he writes, "Punishment was inflicted on the Christian, a set of men adhering to a novel and mischievous superstition." An outspoken skeptic of Christianity, H.G. Wells, author of Outlines of History, wrote, "Jesus of Nazareth is easily the dominant figure in history. I'm speaking of him, of course, as a man. To assume that he never lived and that the accounts of his life are inventions is more difficult and raises more problems in the earth of the historian than to accept the essential elements of the gospel stories as fact." H.G. Wells in an article in American Magazine, July 1922. The Talmud, a Jewish document, called Jesus a sorcerer and practitioner of magic. These later Jews, like the Romans, were obviously hostile to the idea of Jesus and would have eagerly denied his existence if that were a substantive argument. As a child, I received instruction both in the Bible and in the Talmud. I am a Jew, but I am enthralled by the luminous figure of the Nazarene. No one can read the Gospels, truly, without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life. Albert Einstein.